World War II from 1939 to 1945 shattered the notion that World War I was the war to end all wars. We dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, along with the Holocaust, claiming 6 million lives in Nazi concentration camps. This revealed humanity's unprecedented capacity for mass destruction. In this lecture, we will explore how artists responded to this zeitgeist after the war. How did living under the threat of nuclear annihilation affect the creative process? How does one cope with such knowledge? How can artists contribute to a beautiful society while belonging to a culture capable of such destruction? The 1940s marked a return to earlier artistic movements. Before both world wars, Expressionism had offered political critiques of human behavior, particularly regarding labor and social relations. Various artistic movements emerged, each with its own manifesto challenging the establishment and critiquing the status quo. Fauvism, Cubism, Futurism, Der Blaue Reiter, Die Brücke were among the pioneer movements of that time. This evolution led to Dada, which spawned movements like Surrealism, culminating in the Bauhaus minimalist design approach. These movements, shaped by World War I's absurdity, then turned inward to psychology rather than traditional subjects like landscapes, nudes, still lifes, or religious themes. Each movement developed its own unique interpretation of the creative process. Abstract Expressionism took a different approach. It responded to this absurdity by fully embracing abstraction. Our very way of thinking had become abstract, leaving us unable to navigate ourselves or align with an orientation towards a traditional way of thinking. Many are familiar with Jackson Pollock's artwork. His large-scale paintings had a significant impact on the creative process, joining the ranks of game changers like Brunelleschi, Manet, and Duchamp. His drips and splashes might appear simple, leading some to say anyone can splash paint on a canvas. However, when closely examining his work, one discovers intricate layers, patterns, and variations in line quality, ranging from thin to thick, light to dark. A distinct continuity emerges from this apparent chaos. Life magazine took notice of this innovative approach when asking, is he the greatest living painter in the United States? At that time, most considered good art to be traditional and, photorealistic. The guy who painted the realistic scene had talent. That was a common opinion. Abstract Expressionism emerged in this post-war period as the first internationally recognized art movement from America. Pollock led this movement with his pioneering, bold approaches that set him apart. The power of his work lay in the conviction, passion, and expression contained with every drip, every mark, every movement. Several key influences shaped Jackson Pollock's creative process. His connection to the earth was shaped by his upbringing in Wyoming, where he had crucial connections to nature, and it was complemented by the indigenous cultures of the West. This revolutionary decision to place the canvas on the floor challenged centuries of artistic tradition. His gesture carried deep meaning, from the Homo erectus who stood upright, distinguishing civilized humans from four-legged animals, through the 19th century Paris art salons, where paintings hung higher on walls commanding more prestige. Works placed closer to the ground held a lower status. Artists worked on easels or on walls, never on the floor. Pollock not only laid his canvas down to work, but transformed the brush from a tool of elegant strokes into an instrument used for dripping paint. Modern American jazz profoundly influenced his creative process. Watching him work was like witnessing a dance. He moved rhythmically while throwing paint onto the canvas. His movements showed spontaneous improvisational fluidity, combining intuitive repetition with impulsive gestures. Jazz's influence was unmistakable in his approach. Though bold, these paintings differed compositionally from, for example, Caravaggio's Baroque drama. They lacked the diagonals or the tension, remaining essentially static, like wallpaper. While no two areas looked identical, the overall effect created a unified field. Each unique drip and movement contributed to what is called an all-over composition, where visual density remains consistent through the canvas. You'll discover more about his creative process in Pollock, the film, which will be covered in Week 5's quiz. For example, before his famous drip paintings, Peggy Guggenheim commissioned a large painting in 1943 that preceded his laying the canvas on the floor. Within 5 years, he was creating his signature drip paintings on Long Island in a house now managed by Stony Brook University through the Pollock-Krasner Foundation. Today, you can go visit the house and see where the drips of paint remain visible on the studio floor. Connecting Pollock in the context of subject, object, and content can be outlined with a few points. The objective aspect is evident in his physical connection to the earth through working on the floor and the use of this fluid paint as medium. Subjectively, his spontaneous and improvisational gestures influenced by jazz and the post-war emotions, in addition to optimism for the future, all contributed significantly to his role as subject. The paint itself became the subject matter, similar to a bowl of fruit or pipe in traditional paintings. In terms of content, these paintings emerged in a post-World War II era, reflecting the period's anxiety and fear of an atomic catastrophe. The zeitgeist of the early 1950s was defined by post-war fear and the sense that an entire city could be flattened at any moment. This led to a carpe diem mindset, live for the moment. Artists felt that each mark they made, everything that they communicated or expressed, could be their last statement ever. This feeling of immediacy permeated in every moment. Artists rejected careful, photorealistic paintings with its time-consuming glazing techniques. Instead, they embraced broad, fast, bold gestures influenced by existential philosophy and jazz music. This all contributed to the art movement called abstract expressionism. Artists were driven to communicate and express themselves in a new way, making their position in the world known through their paint. This marked the first internationally recognized American art movement, and it started in New York City. AbEx became a common term short for abstract expressionism. Artists developed their own signature styles that defined the continuity in their body of work. Terms like action painting, defined by art critic Harold Rosenberg, were often associated with their creative process, where the act of creating a painting was seen as more important than the final product. For instance, Pollock's spontaneity, impulsivity, and improvisation exemplified this subjective approach. By contrast, Clement Greenberg, another influential art critic of the 1950s and 60s, took a more objective position on abstract expressionism. Greenberg focused on materials, paint as paint, surface as surface, emphasizing the physicality of paintings. He believed artwork should avoid representational references, linear perspective, or illusions of meaning beyond the material reality of the object. While many of his theories seem antiquated today, Greenberg was widely admired in his time. The resistance to his theories largely stemmed from the relationship between art and commerce. His 1939 book, Avant-Garde and Kitsch, warned against the cultural decline caused by consumerism. His notion of kitsch criticized what appealed to most Americans in the 1950s, the pursuit of unnecessary purchases, particularly items that were merely pretty or cute. Greenberg argued that these tendencies towards kitsch represented cultural deterioration, though most people now reject this view. Here's a very good short video about him that will briefly outline what inspired his theories and its problems. Nevertheless, his influence on shaping the art world and the discourse around abstract expressionism was significant.
Clement Greenberg, the art critic, had serious worries about the future of art. It had changed so much in so little time, and in the 1930s was still changing. Who could keep up? What did art even mean anymore? Greenberg needed to figure all this stuff out because that was his job. Let's start by talking about modernism. Modernism can be defined a few different ways, but Greenberg would probably explain it like this. In the olden days, people made paintings of other things. Jesus, or a fancy lady, or a bowl of fruit. The paint itself, and the canvas, and the action of painting were secondary, just a means to an end. Painters painted things because people cared about those things. Oh my God, that's a really fancy lady. I love fruit. But suddenly, right around the turn of the 20th century, painting became something else, and it changed for a few reasons actually. Photography helped. If you could just take a picture of something, why did you have to paint it? So painting was having an identity crisis, but it was bigger than just that. We had industry and secularism and world wars and uprisings, and artists were like, what are we doing? What is art anyway? And well, some theorize that it was Cezanne who was the first to be like, you know what? I don't really care about fruit. What's this stuff in my hand? I'm painting on this canvas that's flat and I'm making illusions and oh my God. What if I keep painting fruit, but it's not about fruit anymore? So he did keep painting fruit, but he wasn't really thinking about fruit. He was thinking about colors and shapes. This, says Clement Greenberg, this is basically what modernism is. Painters using paint on canvases and not caring about the objects they're painting, if they're painting objects at all anymore, but instead caring about the texture and the color and application on the canvas, and forget about illusion. Everyone knows this is two-dimensional. It's not three-dimensional. It's all about medium. And meaning, which used to be, this is Jesus, this is a fancy lady, this is a bowl of fruit, has changed as well. Paintings no longer have to mean something. In fact, shouldn't mean anything. Splash it on there. Have a total sensuous experience. Okay, maybe this is technically a painting of a lady, but it doesn't matter. It could be a painting of anything, and it would achieve pretty much the same effect. This kind of painting became known as abstract expressionism, and Greenberg's idol of abstract expressionism was Jackson Pollock, who was a real asshole, but he made great modernist paintings. So now that we had modernism, what do you call a painting of a horse that's just, a regular painting of a horse? It's about the horse. It's not about paint. Well, if it was made in the 20th century, Greenberg would call it kitsch. It's regressive. We've moved on. If you're still making pretty pictures of horses, you are living in the past. So why was anyone still painting horses? Well, because that's what people like. And when I say people, Greenberg would say commoners, the working class, the proletariat. They like paintings of horses because you don't have to think about them. It's really easy. This is a horse and it looks great. Confront a commoner with a Picasso and he's going to be like, what is all this? Is there even a horse in there? That horse looks terrible. It doesn't even look like a horse. Are those supposed to be people? What's going on? Modernism is a problem because it asks questions that are really hard to answer. So hard that, they're unanswerable. You just can't do it. You can try, you can theorize if you're educated enough, but it'll all just be opinion, really unscientific. Maybe that sounds bad, but Greenberg did not think it was bad. He thought it was awesome. Art that asks questions nobody can answer. Perfect. Because that's what we need to keep art alive. You have to understand that Greenberg, along with pretty much everyone else in the art world, was terrified to death that art was dying. What does it mean for art to die? For all the questions to get answered. If that waif can look at it and be like, oh yeah, I get it, we're doomed. There's no point in making anything anymore. Greenberg was also terrified of kitsch because it was a mind control tool for fascists. Yes, Hitler's like, everybody likes kitsch, right? Because it means you don't have to think, right? So we can use it for propaganda. And meanwhile, he was looking at the avant-garde painters and being like, oh my God, if people have to think hard to understand, maybe they'll think hard enough to realize that I am an asshole. Get out of Germany. There's some problems with Greenberg's theories on modernism. First of all, they basically ignore several major art movements besides abstract expressionism. Like, what about Dada? Dada wasn't really about painting at all. It was about putting a thing on top of another thing because war is everywhere and nothing makes any sense and we're just gonna go crazy and hang out in cafes standing on our heads. Or what about surrealism? Surrealist painting is totally illusionary. It's totally about objects. Those objects just happen to be giant noses and ants. This is totally fruit. It's just fruit that's hovering in front of a guy's face. What about that, huh, Greenberg? He kept strangely silent on that issue. Another problematic thing with Greenberg, his beloved abstract expressionists eventually became cool to the common folk, too. Abstract expressionism in Playboy, in hospitals, museum gift shop, because we all get it now. It's about colors and shapes, and we think it's pretty, too. Greenberg's like, oh no. If commoners like it, it is over. Well, art is dead now. And you are dead too, Greenberg, as of 1994. The end.
In 1981, Annie Leibovitz photographed comedian Steve Martin positioned in front of a Franz Kline painting. His white suit was painted with broad gestures, almost camouflaging him into the canvas. I wanted to share this little comic relief since we had been talking so much about wars and other serious events. Franz Kline often worked with straightforward house paint to make these broad strokes. He created an interesting play on abstraction and spatial relationships, not linear or atmospheric space, but a visual puzzle. For example, is this a white triangle framed by a black background? Or is it black paint that sits on a white background? This flip-flop play of what's in front and what's behind, what covers and what reveals, these are key aspects of Kline's approach. His paintings are good examples of a signature style, which each piece is very unique, yet they all share a distinctive black and white weaving relationship between negative and positive space, and of course, the broad strokes. Wilhelm de Kooning's signature style was gestural abstraction, with dynamic movements, sometimes depicting highly abstracted figures. His early piece titled Woman is not a conventional portrait like a Hollywood actress or the Grand Odalisque. De Kooning drew inspiration from newspaper photographs of jumping cheerleaders. His interest in capturing this movement in a still image aligned with his approach to action painting. De Kooning's signature style is also so distinctive that many artists attempted to mimic his approach. A signature style represents an artist's consistent creative identity, their artistic continuity. When viewing a painting, one can instantly recognize that's a Franz Kline or that's a de Kooning because of their unique artistic fingerprint. This distinctiveness makes it apparent when someone is borrowing from or referencing another artist's style. Color field painting is another approach to abstract expressionism. Mark Rothko painted many different works, but he's most significantly known for his color field paintings. A lot of people say, oh, it's just a bunch of squares. Yeah, it's pretty much a bunch of squares, but experiencing one in person is crucial. Standing before a Rothko is equivalent to watching a sunset, seeing the blue sky shift into yellow where it meets the reflection of water. There's almost a landscape quality happening here. It's not literally a landscape, but it relates to earth and horizon, the sky and heaven, much of what's traditional in painting. Just as a sunset differs while remaining beautiful. That's very much how Rothko approaches these canvases. He created dynamic relationships between colors with significant horizon lines divided much like earth, ocean, sky. They're all separated by horizontal relationships. There's a lot of artists that use different signature styles. Kenneth Nolan painted what you might call bullets or targets. He did this for years throughout his career. Barnett Newman was known for his zip paintings. He created these stripes by placing tape on a canvas, sometimes done with one single brushstroke, then removing the tape to reveal a line. These stripes reflected Newman's own persona, not a literal portrait, but it embodied his character. The formal elements mirrored his appearance as a gentleman in a suit with a thin black tie. This visual parallel between his black jacket, white shirt, and narrow tie became a playful yet meaningful connection between subject, object, and content. The objective flatness of the paint, the subjective vertical stripes representing him as an upright citizen, and the abyss, that is the surrounding expansive world in the viewer's field of vision. When viewing these paintings at the Museum of Modern Art, you encounter an immense red canvas. Newman chose such large scales deliberately, rejecting the conventional small pictures in a frame. Instead, he created an all-encompassing experience where viewers became part of the paintings, with the colors and stripes filling their peripheral vision. Newman masterfully plays with this visual ambiguity. Do we see two panels meeting at a gap in between, or is it a stripe placed on top? This figure-ground relationship and the ambiguous space created with flat paint on flat canvases echoes what we found in Franz Kline's work. Joseph Albers was an artist who studied at the Bauhaus and left Germany and moved to North Carolina, where he was to teach at the Black Mountain College, a small art school that produced many significant artists, including Robert Rauschenberg and Cy Twombly, who we'll discuss in the part 2 of this lecture. Albers brought to the Black Mountain College an artistic approach that was being developed in Germany in the 1920s, a knowledge that had largely disappeared, or at least it was discouraged by art critics like Clement Greenberg. The trend of the 1950s art world was gestural abstract and action painting. Paint as paint, surface as surface, focused on materials rather than the absurdity, surrealism, or psychology. This was an approach Albers began to introduce and influence. At Yale, he developed color theory classes called the interaction of color. This focus was on investigating color relationships, particularly visible in his series Homage to the Square. He explored variations of hues, values, tints, and luminosity through numerous similar paintings with different color combinations. Many art students today still study the interaction of color in their color theory classes. As a color-filled painter, his teaching methods had widespread influence on other artists. A significant shift occurred in the art world during the mid-1950s. This established avant-garde, well, it wasn't advancing as rapidly as decades earlier. Abstract expressionism dominated the contemporary art world, but it discouraged using recognizable images or objects, which were seen as distractions from the paint itself. Well, this brings us to part 2 of our 1945 to 1965 overview.